Let me show you something. These are from the Watchtower's own publications. It describes other churches as spiritually bankrupt, as part of Babylon the Great, as organizations used by Satan to mislead billions of people. Pretty harsh stuff. Now, let me read you something else. This is a comment I received on one of my recent videos from a Jehovah's Witness who disagreed with my content. This guy is talking nonsense. Christians are dedicated to Jehovah God. Apparently, he's the only one who thinks they are dedicated to some organization. Stupid video. Notice anything interesting there? The Watchtower spends decades, literally decades, teaching its members to criticize every religion on earth. But the moment you turn the lens around, the moment you examine what they teach and what they do, suddenly you're the problem. And that's what we're talking about today. The criticism double standard inside the Jehovah's Witnesses and what it tells us about the organization's relationship with truth. Stay with me. Now, before we can talk about the double standard, we need to establish clearly Jehovah's Witnesses are not a passive live and let live religion. They are, and I say this based entirely on their own published literature, one of the most systematically critical religious movements on the planet. And let's walk through exactly how they do this. Point number one, they teach that all other religions are part of Babylon the Great. Now see this quote from their literature. True and false religion. Then in 1951, the time was ripe for Jehovah to give his people a crystal clear understanding of the difference between true religion and false religion. The 1975 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses reports, in 1951, advocates of true worship learned something significant about the term religion. Some of them could well recall 1938 when, at times, they carried the thought-provoking sign, religion is a snare and a racket. From their standpoint then, all religion was unchristian, from the devil. But the Watchtower of March 15, 1951 approved of using the adjectives true and false respecting religion. Furthermore, the absorbing book, What Has Religion Done for Mankind, published in 1951 and released during the Clean Worship Assembly at Wembley Stadium, London, England, had this to say. Taken according to the way it is used, religion in its simplest definition means a system of worship, a form of worship without regard to whether it is true or false worship. This agrees with the meaning of the Hebrew word for it, aboda, which literally means service, regardless of to whom it is rendered. Thereafter, the expressions false religion and true religion became common among Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, in Watchtower theology, Babylon the Great, drawn from the book of Revelation, is identified as the world empire of false religion. Every church that is not the Watchtower organization is considered part of this empire. That includes Catholicism, Protestants, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and every other faith tradition on earth. And the Watchtower has published this position repeatedly. In their Revelation, its grand climax at hand book, they describe Babylon the Great as riding the political beast, meaning they explicitly accuse religious leaders of colluding with governments for power and money. This isn't casual criticism. This is a doctrinal framework designed to teach members that every other religious institution is not just wrong, but satanically inspired, and they target specific churches by name. Jehovah's Witnesses don't just make vague statements about false religion. They get specific. The Catholic Church has been a particular target for decades. The Watchtower has published material accusing it of being the primary embodiment of Babylon the Great, pointing to the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the clergy abuse scandals as evidence of its corrupt spiritual state. They've also targeted evangelical Christianity, criticizing the Trinity doctrine, hellfire, the immortality of the soul, holiday celebrations, and the clergy-laity distinction. Their knowledge book and the What Does the Bible Really Teach book both use the study materials systematically dismantle mainstream Christian belief chapter by chapter. Think about this. The entire model of going door to door, which witnesses are required to participate in, is premised on the idea that the people behind those doors are spiritually lost and need to be corrected. They bring literature, they ask leading questions, they challenge people's existing beliefs. That is, by definition, religious criticism delivered in person to people who didn't ask for it. And for the record, I don't think they should be prevented from doing that. Freedom of religion includes the right to evangelize. But here's the key point. If you build an entire religious practice around going out into the world and telling people their faith is wrong, you have absolutely forfeited the right to be offended when someone examines your faith right back. So what happens when the camera turns around? What happens when someone applies the exact same critical lens to Jehovah's Witnesses that they apply to everyone else? And I can tell you from direct experience running this channel, when you publish content that examines Watchtower doctrine, the history, or policy, even using their own sources, you tend to get a very predictable set of responses from Jehovah's Witnesses in your comments section. And I want to be fair here. Not every Jehovah's Witness who comments is like this. Some engage genuinely and thoughtfully. Those conversations I actually enjoy. But there's a recognizable pattern, and it goes like this. Stage 1, labeling. The first move is almost always to label you rather than engage with your argument. The most common label is apostate. In Watchtower theology, an apostate is someone who has turned against Jehovah's organization, and witnesses are literally instructed to avoid apostates, not to read their material, not to engage with their arguments. So when a witness calls you an apostate in the comments, what they're actually doing is telling themselves and other witnesses watching that nothing you say needs to be taken seriously. The label is a thought stopper. It's not an argument. It's a way of not having to make one. Then stage 2, motive questioning. The second move is to question your motives rather than address your content. Comments like, you just want to destroy people's faith. You're doing this for money and views. You were probably disfellowshipped and you're bitter. Satan is using you. Again, notice what's happening here. They're not engaging with the evidence. They're not saying, actually, the blood policy quote you used was taken out of context. They're saying, you are a bad person and your reasons are corrupt. Therefore, nothing you say matters. This is a classic ad hominem fallacy, and it's not accidental. It's trained behavior. Witnesses are taught from childhood that criticism of the organization comes from spiritually dangerous people with corrupt motives. So when they encounter criticism, their first instinct is to locate it within that framework. Then stage 3, there's threats, spiritual and otherwise. The third stage can get darker. Comments invoking Armageddon, statements that God will judge you, suggestions that you will be destroyed. Sometimes these are framed as concern, but the subtext is often threatening. This happens on many other XJW channels too. I've also received comments that cross the line into personal territory, comments about character, mental state, etc. I won't repeat specifics, but the pattern is consistent enough that I started keeping a file. What's remarkable about this is the contrast. The Watchtower organization presents itself to the outside world as gentle people, peaceful people who are simply there to share the good news. And many individual witnesses absolutely are gentle and sincere. But there is a subset that responds to criticism with a level of aggression that the organization would never officially sanction, while simultaneously having produced that aggression through its own teaching. Let me take you into the actual comment sections of this channel, because I think it's one of the most revealing parts of this whole discussion. And I want to be transparent. I'm not going to read out specific usernames or personally identify anyone. I'm just going to give you the context. But I'm going to talk about the patterns because they are remarkably consistent across videos, across topics, and across time. The first pattern is that there's comments that ignore the entire video. A significant chunk of the critical comments show no evidence that the commenter had watched the video. They were comments about my character, comments about apostates, comments about Armageddon, comments saying I was lying without specifying what I had allegedly lied about. Think about what that tells you. If your position is correct, the easiest thing in the world is to point to the specific claim that was wrong. At 14 minutes 32 seconds, you said X, but actually the Watchtower said Y. Here's the source. That would be devastating. That would actually damage my credibility. But that's not what happens, because if someone actually engages with the evidence, they might have to explain the evidence. And explaining some of these things, the 607 BCE chronology, the failed 1914 prophecy, the changing blood policy, the UN NGO membership, the CSA settlements, is very, very difficult. So it's easier to attack the messenger. And then there's pattern 2, the you don't understand defense. Another common response is some variation of you don't understand our beliefs. You've taken that out of context. You'd have to study with us to really get it. This one is interesting because it sounds like a substantive critique, but watch what happens when you press it. We now respond and say, okay, what specifically is out of context? What's the correct context? The conversation almost never continues because the out of context charge wasn't actually about context. It was a way of dismissing the argument without engaging with it. There's also a strange irony here. Jehovah's Witnesses go door to door claiming to explain the Bible to people who have been studying it their whole lives. They do not say, you'd have to study with us first before we explain anything. They walk right up and make their case. But when someone else makes a case about them, suddenly extensive insider knowledge is required before the conversation can even begin. And then there's pattern number 3, the pivot to evangelism. Now, some witnesses respond to critical content by trying to convert you. Now, I don't get this often. I've seen it on other channels. You make a detailed argument about the Watchtower chronology and you get back, would you like to study the Bible with me? Jehovah loves you and wants you to know the truth. I don't mock this as much as the attacks because at least it's coming from a sincere place, but it's still a deflection. It doesn't address the argument. It assumes the only reason someone would raise questions is that they haven't heard enough Watchtower answers yet. None of this is random. The criticism, double standard, isn't a quirk of individual witnesses. It's a structural feature of how the Watchtower organization has been built. Here's the core of it. The Watchtower teaches that it is Jehovah's exclusive organization on earth, although Jeffrey Jackson said otherwise at the Australian Royal Commission. It's not one of several Christian organizations, not a good option among many. It's the only channel through which God is communicating with humanity. The governing body is described as the faithful and discreet slave of Matthew 24, verse 45. They provide spiritual food. Everything outside that channel is spiritually dangerous. Now, if you genuinely believe that, and most witnesses do genuinely believe it, then criticism of the organization is not just intellectual disagreement. It's not just two people with different interpretations. It is an attack on God's arrangement. It is spiritually dangerous. It is something that could lead people to lose their eternal lives. And through that lens, the aggressive responses to criticism makes a kind of internal sense. If someone is trying to lead your family away from the one organization that can save them, you're not going to calmly debate them. You're going to protect your family from them. The problem is that this belief that the Watchtower is God's exclusive organization is itself a claim that needs to be examined. And the moment you examine it, you start finding problems. The chronological predictions that didn't come true, the doctrines that have changed, the policies that have caused documented harm. The Watchtower's response to those problems has not been transparency and open dialogue. It's been a closed system where questioning is labeled apostasy, where leaving is punished with shunning, and where members are explicitly told not to research the organization from other outside sources. That is not the behavior of an organization that's confident its claims will withstand scrutiny. It is the behavior of an organization that knows its claims might not. And that's why the double standard exists. Criticizing other religions is safe because those religions are outside the system, and witnesses have a framework for dismissing anything those religions say back. But being criticized from the outside is dangerous because the outside might raise questions the organization can't satisfactorily answer. So the defense mechanism kicks in. Not argument, labeling, motive questioning, threats, deflection. Anything to avoid sitting with the questions long enough for them to matter. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this right now, and statistically some of you are, I want to be direct with you because I think you deserve directness more than you deserve performance. And I've said this before. I'm not your enemy. I'm not bitter. I'm not working for Satan. I'm not getting rich of these videos. What I am doing is asking questions. And I think questions are good for everyone, including people of faith. A belief that can't survive a question wasn't worth having it in the first place. Here's what I actually want. I want you to engage with the content, not with my motives, with the specific claims I make in my videos. If I've misquoted a Watchtower publication, tell me and show me the correct quote. If I've misrepresented a doctrine, explain the correct doctrine and show me where the Watchtower says what you're saying. If a court case I've discussed didn't happen the way I described, bring me the documentation. That kind of engagement I will take seriously. That kind of engagement is how real conversations happen. What I won't take seriously, and what I'd encourage you to reflect on, is the impulse to call someone an apostate and assume the conversation is over. Because that impulse isn't coming from confidence in your beliefs. It's coming from a trained reflex to avoid examining them. And here's the question I'd leave you with. Your organization teaches that truth has nothing to fear from investigation. That's actually something the governing body has said. So why does criticism of the Watchtower generate so much fear? If the truth is on your side, the most powerful thing you can do is calmly, clearly, specifically show me and others where I'm wrong. I'll post the correction. I'll own the mistake. But I'm still waiting. The criticism double standard isn't unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. You see versions of it in high control religious groups across religious and political spectrums. But it's particularly stark here because the contrast is so visible. It is an organization that sends people to your door to tell you your religion is wrong, that publishes millions of pieces of literature describing every other faith as Babylon the Great, that has an entire theological framework built around the critique of other belief systems, and yet a YouTube channel asking questions sends some of them into a tailspin of personal attacks, spiritual threats, and coordinated comment campaigns. That gap between what they dish out and what they can receive, that's not a small thing. It's a window into the soul of the organization. And what it shows is not confidence, it's fear. Thank you for watching. Like the video if it made you think. Subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one.